Need to check the names list carefully before writing. Looking at the uploaded names to avoid. Lauren, Daniel, Patricia, Rosie, Naomi, Marcus, Diane, Gloria, Mia, Cassie, Helen, Eleanor, Claire, Brianna, Audrey, Sandra, Vera, Gerald, Ivy, Philip, Fiona, Owen, Nora, Renata, Joel, Celeste, Serafina, Winifred, Rhett, Tessa, Derek, June, Stella, Tatum, Winifred, Rhett, Tessa, Derek, June, Stella, Tatum, Barrett, Conrad, Trevor, Simone, Brooke, Ren, Emmett, Constance, Lynette, Adrian, Harrison, Penny, Petra, Ruth, Callie, Miles, Dottie, Hank, Veronica, Ronnie, Greta, Evelyn, Theo, Kay, Thomas, Zoe, Nadia, Isabel, Keely, Remont, Margot, Bennett, Colette, Adelaide, Lorraine, Margot, Bennett, Colette, Adelaide, Lorraine, Franklin, Sabrina, Darlene, Wesley, Priya, Natasha, Colton, Becca, Alden, Waverly. New names I'll use: Nina, narrator, dad/father, mom/mother, by relationship, Donovan, brother, Cara, sister-in-law, Aunt Bet, Mr. Ashford, mentor, investor. The day my father walked into my spa, I almost didn't recognize him. That sounds strange, I know. You'd think 9 years would make a face more unfamiliar, softer around the edges, easier to miss. But my father looked exactly the same. Same wide shoulders, same silver cufflinks, same way of scanning a room like he already owned it. He just walked in like that. No call. No warning. Like 9 years was nothing more than a long weekend. I was standing near the front desk, reviewing a vendor invoice when the door opened. My receptionist, Jolene, looked up with her usual bright smile. Then I heard his voice, that particular low baritone that used to mean someone in our house was about to get a lecture. And my whole body went cold before my brain even caught up. I want to start from the beginning, because if I just tell you what happened that afternoon, you won't understand why it shook me the way it did. Or why I didn't run. I grew up in a house where love had conditions attached to it. Not the kind of conditions anybody said out loud. Nobody ever sat me down and said, "Nina, you have to earn your place here." It was quieter than that. Subtler, the kind of thing you absorbed through 1,000 small moments until one day you realize you've been auditioning for your own family your entire life. My brother Donovan was the favorite. I say that not with bitterness anymore. Just as a fact, the way you'd state a weather pattern. Donovan was the oldest, the only son, the one my father took fishing on weekends, and to his office on take your kid to work day. I was the afterthought. The girl. The one my mother dressed nicely for church and otherwise didn't seem to know what to do with. My father ran a mid-sized logistics company, not glamorous but profitable. He had big ideas about legacy, about building something the family would inherit. Donovan was supposed to be that heir. I was supposed to marry well and stay out of the way. I had different ideas. I was interested in wellness from early on, not in the vague, trendy way people talk about self-care now. I mean genuinely interested, in the body, in stress, in how people carry tension in their shoulders and their jaws and their lower backs, and how a good treatment plan can change someone's quality of life. I took anatomy electives in high school. I read trade magazines about the spa and wellness industry, the way other teenagers read fashion blogs. By the time I was 17, I had a clear picture of what I wanted to build. I told my father once, just once. We were at dinner, and I'd worked up the courage to explain that I wanted to study aesthetics and eventually open my own wellness center. Something boutique, high-end, medical-grade skincare with holistic services. I had research, I had notes. He laughed. Not cruelly, almost affectionately, which somehow was worse. "That's a hobby, not a career," he said. "You'll study business, work in the company for a few years, meet someone sensible. That's the plan. The plan. Not my plan. His. I was 22 when I graduated with a business degree I never wanted, from a university I'd chosen because it was close enough to keep the peace. I came home. I worked in my father's company for 2 years doing data entry and billing, watching my brother get handed increasing responsibility while I got handed coffee orders. My father told anyone who asked that I was learning the business. What I was learning was that I was invisible. The breaking point came the winter I was 24. I had been quietly saving for years. Birthday money, graduation gifts, every spare dollar from my salary. I had almost $11,000 set aside in an account my family didn't know about. My plan was to enroll in a professional aesthetics program in the spring, get licensed, and start working toward my actual dream. I had told no one. I was afraid of the reaction. Then one evening my father called me into his study and explained, calmly, as if this were perfectly reasonable, that he had used my savings account to cover a short-term cash flow gap in the business. He'd had access because the account was still linked to the family bank profile from when I was a teenager. He said he would pay it back. He said it wasn't a big deal. He said the company is your future too, Nina. This benefits all of us. I stood there and felt something shift inside me. Not rage, something colder and quieter than rage. The sound of a door closing. I asked him directly, "Did you take my money without asking me?" He said I was being dramatic. Within 3 weeks, Donovan's wife Cora, who had moved into our house 6 months earlier, and who had made it her personal mission to comment on everything I did, told me at breakfast that maybe it was time I thought about getting my own place. She said it with a smile. She said it while my mother poured orange juice and said nothing. That weekend my father sat me down and said, in that same calm tone, that perhaps it would be good for everyone if I found an apartment. He said he'd give me a month to get organized. I left in 2 weeks. I didn't want the extra time. I didn't want anything from them. What those first years actually looked like is something I don't talk about much, because it's hard to describe without it sounding like either self-pity or a movie montage. It was neither. It was just hard, steadily, for a long time. I couch-surfed for 3 months between 2 college friends until I could afford a room in a shared house. I worked 2 jobs, reception at a chiropractic clinic during the day, hostess at a restaurant on Friday and Saturday nights. I enrolled in an aesthetics licensing program that met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I was exhausted in a way that became my baseline. But here is what I also did. I paid attention. Working the reception desk at that chiropractic clinic taught me more about the wellness industry than any program could. I watched how the owner ran her practice, how she handled difficult clients, how she thought about pricing and retention. I asked her questions during slow hours. She was generous with her answers. After I got licensed, I started doing mobile skincare sessions on the side, going to clients' homes on Sunday afternoons with a portable setup. Word of mouth is everything in this industry, and I turned out to be good at it, not just technically but at making people feel like they were cared for. That, I later learned, is the actual product. A year in, I had a small but loyal client base. I rented a treatment room by the hour from an existing salon. 2 years in, I rented my own room. 3 years in, I had 2 employees, and then I met my mentor. Her name was Harriet Ashford. She went by H, almost everyone called her that, and she had built and sold 3 wellness businesses before she turned 50. She came in as a client, referred by one of my regulars, and within 20 minutes of her first appointment she started asking me questions that nobody had ever thought to ask me. What was my 5-year number? Did I have a waiting list? What was my average client lifetime value? I barely knew what half those terms meant, but I answered honestly, and she listened. And at the end of the appointment she handed me her card and said she'd been looking for a project. I almost didn't call her. That's the thing about years of being told your ideas are hobbies. You develop a very efficient internal system for dismissing yourself before anyone else gets the chance. But I called her. 2 days later, sitting in a coffee shop, she laid out a vision for a proper wellness center. Not a nail salon, not a day spa, something medical grade and membership based with a serious clientele, and told me she thought I had the instincts to pull it off. She offered to mentor me and to make an introductory investment in exchange for a minority stake. I said yes. That moment changed everything. Over the next 4 years, I built Lumina's Wellness from a rented suite in a mid-range office building into a full-floor operation, with 17 treatment rooms, a membership roster of over 300 clients, and a staff of 22. We had a waiting list. We had been featured in 2 regional lifestyle publications. I had, somewhere in the middle of all of that, also quietly purchased a 40% stake in the commercial building we occupied. A deal H helped me structure when the building owner approached her looking for investors. My family didn't know any of this. I had cut contact the week I moved out and I had not gone back. My mother sent 3 texts in the first year, 2 on holidays, one after my grandmother's funeral, which I attended only briefly and left without speaking to my father. After that, nothing from any of them. I had built an entire life, a real one. Which is why it was so disorienting, standing in my own lobby at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, watching my father walk through the front door. He looked good, I'll give him that. Expensive suit, fresh haircut. Cora was with him. She'd barely changed, same tight smile, same pearl earrings. And Donovan was behind them, hands in his pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. Jolene asked how she could help them. My father said they were there to see the owner. I stepped forward before Jolene could respond. There's a moment when you realize you're not afraid of someone anymore. I don't know exactly when it happened for me. Somewhere in the years between leaving and now. But standing there I was aware of it clearly. Like noticing you've been warm for a while without registering it. I wasn't afraid of him. I was something else entirely. I'm the owner, I said. He looked at me. Something passed across his face, surprise maybe, or recalibration. Then he smiled. Nina. He said my name like a greeting, like no time had passed at all. We need to talk. I looked at Jolene and told her to hold my 11 o'clock by 15 minutes. Then I led them to the private consultation room near the back. I won't pretend I wasn't curious. Some part of me, a smaller part than it would have been years ago but still there, wanted to know what possible justification there was. What story my father had assembled for himself to make this visit feel reasonable. I found out quickly. He sat down across from me, folded his hands on the table, and explained that the logistics company was in trouble. Revenue had been declining for 2 years. They'd lost a major contract. The company needed capital, significant capital, and they needed it within 60 days or they would have to default on a lease for their primary warehouse. I listened without speaking. He said he had heard, through the grapevine, he didn't say who, that I was doing well. He said he was proud of what I'd built. He actually used those words. Proud of what you'd built. As if he'd had any part in it. Then he slid a document across the table. It was a loan proposal. Not a small one. He was asking for $400,000, structured as a low-interest loan, repayable over 10 years. In exchange, he said, the family would consider the past misunderstanding resolved. That was the phrase he used. Past misunderstanding. I looked at the document. I looked at him. Donovan was studying the wall. Cora was looking at her nails. I said you took $11,000 from me without asking, told me to leave my home, and didn't reach out for 9 years. And you're calling that a misunderstanding. My father shifted in his chair. He said things had been complicated. He said Cora and Donovan had needed stability at the time. He said he'd always assumed I'd land on my feet. And look, I had. He said this as if it were a compliment. I said, did it occur to you to ask whether I wanted to land on my feet alone? Cora made a sound, not quite a scoff, but close. She said something about how at some point people had to stop blaming their parents for their own choices. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, very calmly, that this meeting was over and they were welcome to see themselves out. My father's tone changed. He straightened. He said I needed to think carefully before I made a decision I couldn't take back. He said there were people in this town, investors, building owners, who had relationships with my father's circle, and that it would be unfortunate if questions got raised about the backing behind a business like mine. He paused to let that land. Then he said, the building you're in, I know the ownership group. I know Lawrence Beaumont personally. A word from me in the wrong direction could complicate your lease situation considerably. I felt something quiet and certain settle in my chest. Lawrence Beaumont, I said. That's right. Lawrence has been a business partner of mine for 20 years. One phone call. Lawrence sold his stake in this building 14 months ago, I said. My father blinked. The current ownership group, I said, has 3 investors. H. Ashford holds 40%. A private trust holds 20%. I paused. I hold the remaining 40%. The room was completely silent. Donovan looked up from the wall for the first time. I am part of the ownership group, I said. which means the lease you were planning to threaten is, quite literally, mine to manage. My father opened his mouth, closed it. Cora said, very quietly, that can't be right. You're welcome to verify it, I said. The filing is public record. I stood up. The filing is public record. I stood up. I want to be clear about something, I said, and I made sure I was looking directly at my father. I don't want an apology. I'm not interested in resolving anything or healing anything or getting back what we lost, what you took from me. Not just the money, but the years I spent making myself small enough to stay in that house. There's no document that repairs that. I picked up the loan proposal and set it back down in front of him. I'm not your resource. I stopped being that a long time ago, but you drove here today hoping I was still that girl, and I needed you to see that I'm not. I opened the consultation room door. Please don't come back to this location, I said. If you do, I'll ask security to escort you out. Donovan stopped in the doorway on the way out. He didn't say anything for a second. Then he said quietly, so our father couldn't hear, I didn't know he was coming here to do this. I want you to know that. I looked at my brother. I thought about the breakfast table, the silence, the orange juice being poured while I was being told to leave. I believe that you didn't know today specifically, I said. But you knew everything else. He nodded once. Then he left. I stood in the hallway for a while after they were gone. Jolene was pretending to be very busy with her computer. My 11 o'clock client had arrived and was flipping through a magazine in the waiting area. The diffuser by the reception desk was putting out that faint cedar and eucalyptus scent I'd chosen specifically because clients said it made them feel like they'd left the city. Everything was normal. My business was normal. My day was continuing. I thought about what my father had expected to walk into. A daughter who was struggling enough to need help, grateful enough to provide it, and guilty enough. Guilty about what exactly I was never sure, but guilt was always part of the currency in our house. To agree to terms that erased 9 years in exchange for a loan that served only him. He had not found that daughter. I went and greeted my 11 o'clock. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony for a long time. I called H and told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Lighter," I said. Which is strange because nothing actually changed today. He's still who he is. They're still who they are. H said, "Something changed. You saw yourself clearly in front of them. That matters." She was right. That was the thing I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even the clean justice of the twist. Just clarity. The kind that only comes when you stop hoping someone will become different and finally let them be exactly who they are. My father built a legacy with conditions attached to it. He didn't build it with me, and it turned out I didn't need him to. I built mine anyway. Quietly, slowly, in the years when no one from that house was watching. That's the part they never see coming. There's something nobody tells you about building a life from scratch. It doesn't feel heroic while you're doing it. It just feels like Tuesday, another shift, another invoice, another evening where you're too tired to think about the family that let you go and too stubborn to let that be the reason you stop. I spent a long time being angry, not loudly, not in ways anyone would notice, but the quiet kind of angry that lives in your chest and makes you work harder than is probably healthy. When my father took my savings without asking, when my mother poured orange juice and said nothing, when Cora smiled across the breakfast table like she'd already won something, I carried all of that. What I eventually understood is that I had a choice about what to do with it. Not the choice people talk about in motivational posts, the forgive and release kind. Something more practical. I could let that anger eat the years I had left. Or I could let it build something. I chose to build. What happened the day my father walked into Lumina's wasn't really about the loan. It wasn't about the $400,000 or the outdated leverage he thought he had over my lease. It was about the fact that he had constructed a version of me, a daughter who would always be available to be used, a girl who could be sent away and called back when convenient, and he had never once updated that version to match the real one. That's what his miscalculation actually was, not the business strategy. not the assumption about Lawrence Beaumont. He simply had never bothered to ask who I'd become. H once told me that the most dangerous thing you can do in any situation is assume the other person hasn't changed. She said it in the context of a business negotiation. But I've thought about it in 100 other contexts since. My father walked into my building still holding the image of a 24-year-old who cried in her car after leaving that house with 2 suitcases. He had no idea what 12 years of Tuesday after Tuesday after Tuesday looks like when it accumulates. Donovan stopped in the doorway and told me he hadn't known. I believe the literal version of that, but there's a kind of not knowing that is chosen, a deliberate looking away that is its own form of participation. He knew who our father was. He knew what had happened. He just decided, every day for 12 years, not to do anything about it. That silence has a weight to it, and eventually it becomes a choice just as much as any action would have been. I'm not telling this story to punish anyone. I told it because I spent too many years believing that what happened to me was evidence of something wrong with me, that being overlooked, being sent away, being treated as an afterthought in my own family meant I actually was one. The work of those 12 years wasn't just financial. It was unlearning that. It was sitting across from a mentor who asked me serious questions and learning to take them seriously. It was building something real and then standing in front of it and accepting that I had built it. When my father sat across from me in that consultation room, what I felt was not triumph, it was just clarity. The quiet, unremarkable, completely sufficient feeling of knowing exactly who you are in a room where someone once made you feel like you were nothing. That's what integrity actually is, I think. Not a dramatic declaration. Just the steady accumulation of choices that add up, over time, to a person your future self can stand behind.